Welcome back to the Garden State Law Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Lau. Joining me today is Saiber environmental attorney Geri Albin. Geri, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So today, Geri and I will be discussing Geri's practice as well as environmental law in New Jersey. Before we get going, Geri, maybe you can introduce yourself and your practice a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Geri Albin. I've been at Saiber for 15 years. I do a variety of things, but mostly in the environmental litigation and transactional space. I started at Saiber as a labor and employment lawyer. So I did general litigation for a lot of years. And in about 2010, there was a need for a young associate to participate in some settlement negotiations for two of our firm's institutional clients that had been brought in as a third party in a little known Superfund site, the lower Passaic River. So the Passaic River is a 17-mile river. It's one of the most polluted waterways in the country. And there has been a lot of litigation. There was a state litigation that was settled, and now there's a federal litigation that's ongoing. And so as a young associate, I was really excited. I went to, I think it was like one of the big law firms in New Jersey and sat around a table with dozens of really accomplished environmental attorneys and basically took notes and just tried to participate in the settlement as best as I could. And it was incredible and really an amazing experience. And it got me sort of on this road for the environmental law. And I worked with a partner, Randy Schillinger, who at the time, I had not worked much with. And then, we had hit it off during, this settlement negotiation. And these clients were wonderful and we still work with them. And so it was like a really fantastic experience. And then I just was like, this is what I want to do. And it's how I sort of found my niche in environmental law.
And it's proof that you can practice one area for a few years and kind of pivot throughout your career. So that's cool.
Yeah. Environmental law is a funny thing because it has like a huge scope. So this was a state litigation about, that parties were being targeted and being sued for contributing hazardous substances to the Passaic River and were being requested to clean it up. And at the time, I was like, environmental law has so many acronyms that a colleague had given me, like a 15-page spreadsheet.
We're going to get to some of those acronyms too, I believe, because I don't know what
I remember all their, all the like proper names for them. But it was so confusing and so complex. And still, I feel like I'm learning new things every day and it's changing and growing. But I just, it's been like a really fun 13 years of learning
Sure.
and, participating in it.
So I don't know a lot about environmental law, but I would imagine that, and we're a Garden State Law podcast, given New Jersey being its population, being heavily regulated, a lot of industry and commerce here, I would expect that New York and New Jersey, this general tri-state region, has some serious implications on environmental law, and it's probably one of the areas that's the environmental law has the biggest impact. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think obviously environmental issues are nationwide because before anybody really regulated it, but New Jersey has some of the strictest environmental laws in the country for sure. But they're also designed at not only protecting health, human, and the environment, but also enabling companies and industries to function in a way that there's regulations that allow them to do the business they need to do, but in a safe way, and also in a clean, environmentally sound
Sure.
way. We, as Saiber, we represent mostly industrial facilities, chemical companies, developers who are trying to navigate the very strict regulations, especially under the Murphy administration and with the Biden administration. These you see with the times and the political climate, things go up and down. And right now it's like a very strict and heavily regulated moment for a lot of our clients.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about your practice.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that a lot of environmental concerns, at least in an example I'm about to give, are tied to acquisitions or sales of properties. So maybe if I give you, which I think is most helpful, getting to know someone's practice and what they do and some of the concerns in New Jersey, if I give you a scenario, we can talk a little bit about where the environmental concerns and where you kind of come in the process. So if we're thinking about a business locally, even here, Morris County, and you have a business, a site that's selling a business, or selling a property, I should say, and they owned an industrial manufacturing company for 75 years in New Jersey. And who knows what was happening there? They were making widgets. Maybe those widgets had sludge and goop and I don't know. And who knows what was going on with some of what was happening there. But they're selling the business. They're moving out, and someone wants to come in. It's a several-acre site, and there is an environmental component to this. Even before, I would imagine, what's happening there, the due diligence needs to happen, and what happens if you find something. So if you have a client who's purchasing a property and there's so much unknown, where do you come in, and what are the things that you're thinking about, or really anybody who's doing this should be thinking about? Because I would imagine regardless of you should be aware of environmental possibilities anytime you're purchasing a large, commercial property in New Jersey. So where do we kind of fit in there?
Sure, absolutely. And I think this isn't just a plug for Saiber, but for anybody that is acquiring a property that may or may not have been an industrial facility or have some kind of environmental contamination or concern. When you are selecting a law firm, we have seen a lot of people select law firms that don't have designated environmental attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And
are they usually real estate attorneys? They're trying to do their best.
Transactional M&A, and sometimes they have to bring in other firms that specialize in environmental. And the nice part about Saiber, and here's the plug, is we have both. So we have the transactional real estate experience, and also this small environmental niche where we can come in on an asset deal or a stock deal, and if there's any environmental concern with the property or hazardous substances or any of that, we can come in with our expertise at the same time, all under the same roof. So I don't think a lot of people think about that when they're doing this. They use their attorney they've always had, and they think they can handle it. But these environmental issues are very specific and very niche, and if you're not in the space, it's very difficult to sort of fake your way through it.
Yeah.
Like some attorneys like to do. So
Sure.
That's the plug.
Yeah.
With respect to our clients, so, we think it's really important to get, if you're going to be buying a contaminated or a property that may or may not have environmental concerns, the due diligence process is very important.
And is this something, carte blanche, any acquisition, you say, before we do anything, you should talk to our environmental attorney just so we have this covered? Or are there some instances where you go, no, it's never going to happen?
Yeah, it depends. So I think it depends on the client and the property and what you're doing. But typically, if you're buying any kind of commercial property, you probably want to do some environmental due diligence in advance just to make sure that you've covered all your bases. There are a number of environmental statutes in New Jersey. One of them is ISRA, the Industrial Site Recovery Act. That's implicated when you have either an industrial facility, and usually your business gets what they call an NAICS code, and it's assigned to you. And if it is part of the statute that ISRA is implicated, then the seller or whoever contracts for it, all sorts of environmental responsibility with respect to making sure the site is cleaned up, has final remediation documents before the sale closes, or, you can work out so it can occur after the sale closes. So part of our job is to determine sometimes what that NAICS code is. Sometimes people have it in a lease. Even leaseholds are responsible for ISRA. So there's triggering events that implicate. So if you're going to cease your operations, the statute lists a number of different triggering events. So if you're just shutting your company down and you are an industrial facility and have hazardous waste at your facility, you will trigger ISRA, and you will need to follow what the statute says. And we can help you through that process.
Mm-hmm. And is this process, mm-hmm. depending on what happens, I would imagine this can drag out for a while at times.
Yeah.
Which could probably make your job complicated because people want to close a transaction. I want to buy this building and I can't because you're telling me we have a problem. Yeah. So even if there's no problem, you still come in.
Well, we want everyone to do it appropriately, because if you don't carefully do due diligence and make sure you have done the all appropriate inquiry standards, you won't have the protections, the liability protection. So you don't want to buy a property that's contaminated without doing the due diligence, because then
you're liable.
100%. That's the law. So, and you don't want that, because, I will have a job in perpetuity forever and ever, because some of these environmental issues will never be cleaned up. But there is a way to mitigate your liability and also your responsibility and how much you're going to want to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. It's an insurance policy, holding having it in, I mean, having attorneys in general is kind of like one big insurance policy, but environmental attorneys specifically, whether or not you may feel comfortable with, the property, but God knows what can happen if you don't have someone.
And sometimes if we know that we don't know something, we encourage our clients to research or potentially get an actual insurance policy that will pay for down the road, if something changes and now they find a new contaminant or an emerging contaminant that you don't even know about because the history of the site is so lengthy or so unknown that you can't even to tell. Listen, sometimes you have a sophisticated buyer that is used to buying demise properties and understands what they need to do with respect to the environmental. And like those clients for me, like piece of cake. It's when you have a mom and pop shop that's looking to close and they've been operating for 50 years and they never even realized they were supposed to do all these things like keep drums of, I don't know, hydraulic fluid on a pallet or, not leaking into the ground because,
like an auto body shop.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, or, we could talk about this later or whenever, but PFAS or perfluoroalkyl, I'm not going to say it correctly. I'm just going to say the acronym. PFAS is an emerging contaminant that they have found it's a man-made chemical that is basically in most products, especially industrial products. So it's like in soap, and the government is regulating PFAS more now, but we don't know where it's going to go. So if there's firefighting foam where there was a fire, or because that's typical, or that the plant previously manufactured using PFAS or any of those things. Those are the types of, concerns that, we sort of talk about or look at or do the due diligence for. Tanks is a big one.
Yeah. But that's interesting because it doesn't necessarily have to be a large scale manufacturer of, big products, whatever. It can be you're leasing or purchasing a property and it was a dry cleaner. I know there's environmental concerns with dry cleaners as well. So just because it's a small business doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have, not to strike fear in people, but,
You can still do it and you can protect yourself if you negotiate and draft your transactional documents in a specific way. And that's a big part of our job. So like if you're buying and selling, we're drafting the agreements in a way to really capture at who's responsible for what. And listen, you have to sometimes, you're buying a demise property and the seller will put in escrow $300,000 because there's an issue. You don't know how big or how small, but we can negotiate an environmental escrow so that you could use that money later if you find that there's a remediation problem that, because oftentimes it's better, there's two thoughts on it. So like if you're buying a property, sometimes you want to be able to do the work because it's your property and you know that you'll do it the right way. That's or you might want to buy the property and have not touched the environmental at all, and the seller will be the one who's responsible. That's what we sort of work out with the client to see, who has what tolerance for what type of, what kind of deal it is.
Are there some key indicators to purchasers that tell you right away, you don't even have to look at the site? We got an issue, not just necessarily because of the company, but an area. Like I don't want to pick on any towns or places in New Jersey, but I could imagine there's certain areas where you have a client saying, we're looking to purchase a property here, and you go, there's been a lot of problems there. We need to really talk about this.
Yeah, for sure, because you want them to have the wherewithal to understand. Because if a prior owner, goes bankrupt or defunct, then the DEP may look to you to be the one who's cleaning up. But if you've done your all appropriate inquiry or your due diligence in the way that you have an innocent purchaser protection, then you won't be held responsible. And that's what we really help you do. But yeah, absolutely. I hate to be the killer of all deals, but sometimes our real estate folks see me coming and they're like, please just be cool, because we don't want to scare anyone. But, if you're taking on a piece of property that's contaminated, because we're in New Jersey and because the laws are so specific, you have to just understand that there may be, some work you have to do, some monitoring or operation and maintenance or however, and you can absolutely have the seller or somebody else be responsible for that. But we need to be involved to discuss those types of things.
But I guess at the same time that if you're representing a seller, and there's issues that are found by either side, you're not selling this property. your hands are tied. You have to do something, right? So it's not kind of like, well, let me just close this deal and this deal's over and let me find someone else, because we're going to keep, and then there's probably a certain amount of.
Yeah, I mean, there are, as we represent sellers all the time with properties that have environmental issues, and we can get them to a place where they can hand off the responsibility and the liability and walk away from the deal feeling like they did what they were supposed to do. We contracted it. We put up the escrow. We did what we needed to do. A lot of it is we bring in environmental consultants all the time that help us, because under ISRA, you're required to hire a licensed site remediation professional. In 2009, the Site Remediation Reform Act was passed, which sort of like totally changed the way the DEP was involved in site remediation, and it sort of privatized it. So now they have these environmental consultants who get licensed by the state, who are required to be brought in, paid for by the client, who are basically standing in the shoes of the DEP. So it gets tricky because you pay them, so they work for you, but really they have, a standard that they have to uphold. And I think having the right consultant on the job really helps either narrow the focus, protect the client, make sure it's done correctly so that there's no issues, and we cross all our T's and dot our I's. So like we have different environmental consultants for different kinds of jobs. Big jobs, we can use a big environmental consulting company that have all sorts of engineers and blah, 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 and all these things. Or we have the guy who is the tank pull guy. Like we know the environmental consultant that if we're going to pull a tank, he's the guy, he's seen it, he's done it all, and he can do it well and at a low cost. Or, if there's a specific kind of contamination, so bedrock contamination, where the water is really, and contaminated groundwater is deep, we have environmental consultants who are specialists in bedrock groundwater contamination. And I think, not all LSRPs, it's not a one size fits all. It's like, we've have experience where we know so many really fantastic professionals that can help in like very specific ways. And we try to pair our clients with the correct type of consultant to help manage and minimize their sort of liability in whatever project.
So that's always been my question about I never really knew what an LSRP does. I know that they're very involved in the process.
Yeah.
Obviously, Geri's not going out with a shovel to the property.
No, but I do like to go. It's a fun field trip.
So that aspect, the investigation aspect and the looking into the physical aspects of the property, that's basically the LSRP who's appointed by the state, and there's, I guess, subcontractors. Is that the way it works? Or an LSRP has...
So it's
their company or their entity. Yeah. They have the engineer. They have each component.
It really depends on the shop. Like there's one solo LSRPs, and then there's ones who are in bigger companies that have all different aspects of all different things. So it depends on what you need, and the size of the site, and it will also depend the bottom line, like how much money, you're going to spend. Because when you get to a site and you have an LSRP come, typically they do a preliminary assessment and a site investigation in New Jersey. In federal, it's phase 1. You should probably do them both so that you're covered by both laws. And they like walk the site and they do all the things, but they haven't even not until they determine after the preliminary assessment if they need to do more. Do they like stick anything in the ground and take like a proper sample? But real samples are very expensive. So, they sort of dictate like how many, where, depending on the groundwater flow or what, if there's soil contamination or if they see something funny, and they, prepare all the reporting and submit it to the DEP for review. We also review the reports to make sure there's nothing that we want to highlight. Because once the LSRP does, or the environmental consultant does the report, we review it because we want to see if there's anything that we want to highlight to our client that's like, like this is a area mapped for historic fill, and most of New Jersey is mapped for historic fill. Like, are we going to need a deed notice, or are we going to need to do, are we going to ask the seller to do that, or is that something that we're going to have to take care of? So we know and can highlight in their reporting the types of stuff that we want to point out to the client, who sometimes is not, well versed in the landscape. So, it would be helpful to have like sort of that background, and we help.
Okay, we don't need to get into the weeds about this, but I need to know what historic fill is.
So historic fill,
you can't just say historic fill without telling me what it is.
I wish I had the proper definition on me, but it's like ash and concrete, and it's just like it's in most of the state. Like because
something historical stood there and it can't be disrupted, basically.
yeah, and it has like a specific background of different constituents that like is not good, and so it's mapped, so everybody knows where it is.
Okay.
So like there's clean fill. So like right nowadays, if you want to like there was all these case law and stories where people would bring in dirty dirt and actually there's like new law on dirty dirt, by the way, but we won't get into that. So they would fill like under a baseball field with like terribly contaminated materials and then cover it up, and like everyone, was outraged.
Yeah.
And now that's absolutely not allowed. And, you have to bring in clean fill and it has to be certified and all of these things. And there's other places with historic fill, which is typical in industrial regions where there's been a lot of industrial use. And you could just put a D notice on it saying like this has historic fill. You don't have to clean it up or dig it out. It just, everybody knows that it's there. So like you're not going to like farm in the historic fill. You know what I mean? You're not going to do farming around.
Right.
But like it's fine.
Yeah. And that's probably prevalent in New Jersey, historic field.
Yeah. So they have mapping. So the DEP has mapped different places, but it's something we do highlight for clients, of course, because, it could affect the use of the property, or, if you need to have any sort of institutional or engineering or controls on it, that they should know about.
Yeah, I can only imagine if you're constructing something in Morristown, New Jersey, which has got to be one of the most historical places in America. You just have your fingers crossed, go like, I hope this is...
What they would say is like ash and like chips and concrete and like, just...
So you mentioned this before. Again, I had said I don't know a lot about environmental law, but one thing I always hear about is PFAS.
Yeah.
It's kind of the hot topic right now. These are micro plastics that unfortunately exist everywhere. How are you dealing with this? How does this come into your world? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So PFAS is a man-made chemical. It was typically in like Teflon, and it was in firefighting foam. It was in it's in your clothes, and it is like very difficult to. It just takes on a life of its own. You can't destroy it.
Or this is when it biodegrades, like if
it doesn't biodegrade.
Okay, but it breaks down and exists.
Yeah, so it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's like it's in plastic. It's in like food packaging. Yeah. It's now in our water. It's in the grass. So it's become this incredible, like it's taken on sort of a life of its own. So like if you tested our blood, we have like levels of PFAS in it. Not technically dangerous to you, but like because it is now permeated so heavily in all these things, and that's why I think it's gained so much traction. They call it an emerging contaminant, and they're just starting to regulate it in the water. And there's been cases on it in New Jersey specifically. But it's so like I threw out my Teflon pans, my old ones, and now they have new PFAS free materials that you could buy to cook in and all those sorts of things.
It's a good excuse to buy a nice pan set. Is that what you're saying? Because I'm in the market.
Yeah. Make sure it's PFAS free.
Fair enough.
And, I think it's gained a lot of recognition because the EPA and the DEP are just starting to understand how to regulate it. It's very difficult to get rid of it. So also...
Sounds like there's no getting rid of it.
There is. And I think that, carbon typically... So like, for example, we represent a client in a number of Superfund sites in New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. And it's in like gloves, latex gloves. So how do you test for PFAS when you're holding it's already
there?
So it's been like a really an interesting science where they're trying to figure it out. And I've heard of different organizations that are coming up with different ways to sort of get reduce it and get rid of it. But right now, for the most part, we're seeing the EPA and monitoring it, wanting us to test for it and have levels of it. And it's unclear how it's going to be regulated. And we're still in this even though we've known about it for years, still understanding how it's going to really affect sites and cleanups and remediations, going forward.
Do you suspect moving forward there is going to be regulation on whether or not you can manufacture with it?
Yeah. I think there are a number of states, if I'm not mistaken, that have banned the manufacture of and use of it. Sure.
Yeah. Probably a good idea.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about just you, your history in environmental, how you got into it. You touched upon it in the beginning about your kind of entryway, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you went from an employment lawyer. You mentioned going to this conference or meeting. You're taking notes. So transition itself.
So I went to this for the Passaic River. I sat in on the settlement negotiations. We worked through that, obviously, with a number of partners in my firm, with our clients to get to a settlement. And then one of our clients, their in-house counsel, had retired and asked us to handle all their Superfund legacy sites. So they had acquired a company that had a lot of legacy sites. So we do a lot of Superfund work in a number of different sites, and Superfund law is these, big hazardous waste sites, which have hundreds of parties sometimes who are working on cleaning up that site. And we do work sort of fighting for our client to have whatever allocation of responsibility in cleaning up those sites. So we monitor them, and we work with the client to sort of understand the history and, what their role was, before all these regulations, when, people were just sending drums to a reconditioner and then sludge was, leaking into the rivers. And now they're saying, oh, we have records of your client in 1971 sending these drums, et cetera, and you're responsible. And so then we're like, whoa, we're not responsible, or however it works. So I do a lot of that Superfund work. We do also simple things. So you are buying, you understand that there's like a tank on your neighbor's property.
Right.
And you want to go onto their property, or they want to come onto your property to like test to see if your tank is leaking. And we will draft an access agreement for you, a simple agreement that covers you so that if they come on your property and do testing, you won't be held responsible if somebody gets hurt or if they do something and you want them to put your grass back the way it was. We take care of those types of things too.
Can a neighbor in that situation, can a neighbor say like, no, it's good. I don't want you testing. I don't want to know.
Yeah,
I don't need to know. I don't want to know.
So it depends.
Yeah.
If the DEP is requiring that the work is performed because they need to find like a source of some sort.
Yeah.
You could say no, but then they can bring an order to show cause in court, and there is a statute that says that you are required.
Just don't say no.
It's like, but make sure you say like, I want an access agreement, and then come to us, and we'll say the things you want in your access agreement. So they can't like come on your property at 6 a.m. wake your kids. Like you'll have it done in normal hours, but we like put that on the agreement so that it's done carefully. Access agreements are also with commercial properties as well. If you don't want it to mess up your business. During your store hours, you don't want people digging because, there's a groundwater flow problem and they think that the contamination is coming from their side to your side. And obviously you want them to test, but you don't want it to mess up, the flow of your business operation.
Sure.
So you can negotiate all of that. That's all negotiable. We'll help you with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of what else. My practice, is some litigation, but mostly transactional. We work with clients all the time. There are a lot of reporting obligations for clients with respect to if they have hazardous substances. So we'll help them, figure that out. Permitting is a big part of it. We do a lot of that. It's really varied. It's fun. I mean, you don't realize that there's all these little things happening until, you're like, oh, wait, I don't understand this at all.
Sure.
Can you help? And then we try to get involved.
And at the end of the day, you're doing something good.
Yeah.
You try to help the environment.
You say environmental lawyer and everyone's like, oh, you're a tree hugger. Like, you're great. I'm like, oh, we represent chemical companies. But they're, compliant and regulated and doing the right thing and, doing their best to, protect human health and the environment always, and always, making sure that there's records and manifests and reporting obligations because there's a lot of like sticky things that can happen. And we see it all the time, but that's what makes the day go fast.
Sure. Well, Geri, thank you for joining us today. If any of our listeners or watchers have a question for Geri, you can reach her at 973-845-7719 or GALBIN@Saiber.com. Thank you for all those who are listening and watching. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or podcast channel, and we'll catch you next time.